I stood right in the middle of that dusty, forgotten salvage yard. My hand rested on a corroded engine block. Everyone saw a worthless scrap, missing the hidden potential underneath. Amelia Brooks just laughed at me right before the impatient crowd. She claimed I wasted cash on useless things, judging my life entirely by its rusty, tired surface. The crowd laughed along. I stayed quiet, knowing better. I paid a few hundred and hauled that supposedly dead car engine back to my shop. 3 weeks later, a racing legend showed up. He had the patience to look closer, and everything instantly changed. Was I holding a pile of junk, or the greatest hidden automotive discovery of my life? Stick with me to uncover why. Our quiet town of Mill Haven, Kentucky, sat hidden between two ridges of old-growth timber. A place where flashy surface ambition tended to arrive young and leave fast. We who stayed learned to accept the gap between our bright dreams and what we became, often missing the gold beneath. I was 34 years old, running a humble one-bay auto garage down on Elm and 4th. A modest operation featuring a hand-painted sign and 2 hydraulic car lifts. And that perpetual smell of heavy motor oil baked deep into the concrete floor. I was the mechanic who could diagnose a complex transmission problem by its sound alone. I could feel right through a wrench when a hidden bolt was 2 turns from stripping. Yet my reputation in town had curdled from quiet respect into something looking heavily like pity. My schedule stayed thin most weeks, filled mostly with quick vehicle oil changes and busted exhaust pipes. Work that paid just enough to keep the lights on. Most folks only saw the tired exterior they expected. They saw a man lacking forward motion, too old to restart and too stubborn to quit. But let's look deeper. I didn't always live in the forgotten margins of Mill Haven. In my mid-20s, I held a prime position at a regional automotive engineering firm in Louisville, running heavy load stress analysis on early prototype engine mounts. My supervisor was actually quietly grooming me for a major senior role, a mechanical engineering position that would have doubled my salary and pulled me right into the orbit of true professional recognition. I was happily engaged to Amelia Brooks then. I loved her with the naive conviction of someone who hadn't yet learned how fast hard times can completely unmoor a relationship. I had a shiny future then. At least, the way you and I might think when we lack the patience to see how quickly surface plans shatter. Then my dad, Raymond Carter, got diagnosed with a degenerative neurological condition that accelerated far faster than any medical doctor projected. I made a choice that honestly required zero deliberation on my end. I left Louisville, abandoned my engineering dreams, and returned to Mill Haven to manage my dad's full-time care. The sacrifice was entirely total, and mostly invisible to everybody looking at me. I sold my gear, gave up the apartment, and walked away from that professional ladder without ever looking back. My dad had been a truly exceptional mechanic in his prime. A man who rebuilt complex engines in a tiny shop on Route 9 for 30 years. I inherited both his little garage and his deep, patient instinct for the real work. For nearly 4 years, I drove my dad to appointments, managed medications, and kept the auto shop running enough for those medical bills, and accepted my narrowing world without complaint. True value requires immense patience. Amelia tried staying at first, but patience isn't commitment. Somewhere deep in that second year, things finally shifted. She started giving me this look I knew all too well, a mix of disappointment and pure restlessness, like she watched me choosing to just fade away. She finally left me on a Tuesday evening in October. Cleanly, without any cruelty, said she needed a man who was actually building a future. My father, Raymond, died 14 months later. I buried him on a gray afternoon with 4 people there. I kept his garage, his old tools, and the quiet habits he passed down to me. One of those was walking through local salvage yards on those long, slow weekends, lifting corroded engine castings, studying worn valve housings, listening to how metal spoke when someone had originally forged it with real, honest intention. I hoarded car parts the way others hoard memories, never for the money, not for some master plan. I just knew that the broken things people overlook usually hold far more value than shiny things. The whole town thought I was crazy, said I was just chasing my dad's ghost. Eventually, most folks just stopped wondering about me altogether. Fast forward to a Thursday morning in early March when Ryan Foster called me. Ryan said he got a fresh batch from an estate down in Harlan County. sounding like a guy who sold scrap metal by the pound and found every single piece completely fascinating. A whole truck of vintage engine components. If you want to dig through before I crush it all, get here now. I hung up, locked my auto shop, and drove straight to the scrapyard, skipped breakfast entirely. Ryan's junkyard sat on 4 sprawling acres right on the eastern edge of town. From the highway it looked like organized chaos. Up close you and I could see chaos had definitely won. Rows of stripped car frames sat in lines of decaying condition. Chrome oxidized to a dull gray, interiors totally consumed by years of weather and pure neglect. Smashed radiators stacked right beside rusted driveshafts and cracked engine intake manifolds. And the entire yard carried this very specific scent. Stale petroleum mixed with heavy rust and something faintly sweet. Like rotting rubber. Honestly, I found it way more comforting than anyone else could ever understand. You can't rush uncovering potential. I walked those rows with the deliberate calm of a man with zero hurry. My eyes tracked shapes like a master mechanic, reading a manual, absorbing every detail without stopping my feet. I finally spotted the new delivery piled up near the back gate. Mostly what I expected. Standard domestic V8 blocks from the 70s and early 80s. Common castings, basic mass-market hardware. Machinery built for basic reliability instead of any real distinction. I dug through the pile methodically, setting aside a few salvageable pieces, until my hand brushed something buried under tangled coolant hoses that made me freeze completely. This engine block was significantly smaller than everything else around it, and it had a bizarre geometry that didn't match any standard production line I could instantly recognize. I managed to pull it free, resting it right on a flat piece of cardboard. Then I just stared at it for a long minute, didn't touch a single other thing. The bare casting was practically hidden under decades of heavy grime and baked on oil. But the underlying material was totally wrong. Wrong in the exact way that proves hidden potential is waiting. You and I know value hides. This piece was way too refined for a scrap pile. The fin geometry on that old cylinder head totally unconventional. The port angles were way too aggressive for the street. The entire layout felt incredibly tight. A focused quality I instantly knew as purpose-built. Pure competition machinery, never meant to just haul daily commuters. Someone stamped a serial code right near the bell housing mount on the engine block. But years of heavy rust and deliberate grinding left it looking like a totally ruined, unreadable scar. Almost unreadable anyway. I pulled a dirty rag from my pocket. I wiped it down firmly, patiently studying the faint shadow buried deep in the metal. Ryan strolled around the corner, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He watched me with the dull curiosity of a guy who had seen collectors act crazy. His entire adult life, really. The man was just totally incapable of being surprised. That junk has been rotting in a barn forever, Ryan pointed out to me. Part of some massive estate haul down south. Nobody else wanted that ugly piece. Wrong bolt pattern for everyday cars. Way too small for most engine rebuilds. He just shrugged. Total junk, if you ask me. I didn't say a word. Stick with me here. It takes real patience to spot beautifully machined tolerances at the oil galleries. The intake port geometry was beautifully blended by hand, not just slapped into a cheap production mold. And then I noticed it. A strange secondary boss on the driver's side that served no obvious purpose. That was exactly when I heard them. A flashy new German sedan slowly rolled into the dirt lot. 3 or 4 folks stepped out, way too sharply dressed for this freezing gray morning. Dodging muddy puddles with that dramatic caution of people who think places like this are completely beneath them. I spotted Amelia Brooks just before she finally noticed me. That gave me a split second to figure out my reaction. I chose to show zero emotion, just give them nothing. She had 2 polished women and some guy I didn't recognize tagging along. She wore that smug, perfect look of someone obsessed with forward motion, ignoring whoever she had left behind years ago. Her eyes locked onto mine, her expression barely shifting with cold recognition. Then came a quick flicker I couldn't even name. Instantly masked by her smooth social recovery, she strolled right over to me with total authority, staring down at the oily block sitting on the cardboard by my boots. "Logan," she said, her tone exactly the same. "Still doing this?" It wasn't really a question. I held her gaze. "Still doing this?" I confirmed calmly. She stared at the block, taking the posture of a harsh judge. evaluating the evidence for a rigid conclusion she had already reached. Then she looked at me, not quite pity, not amusement, just that heavy judging space hanging awkwardly between us. "You're buying a totally dead engine," she said. "In a junkyard on a Thursday morning." She let that hang. Some things just never change, I guess. One of her polished friends let out a quiet, mocking little laugh. The guy smirked at his shoes. "Throwing good money after bad," Amelia added. Her voice dropped. "Like you always do. Like every choice you've ever made, Logan." I simply reached into my heavy jacket, pulling out 4 folded bills. I handed Ryan the cash in silence, lifted the block, and walked away. Let them laugh. They lacked the patience anyway. Let me tell you, their laughter was brief and smug. I gently loaded the block into my truck bed, locking it down tight with a strap. Then I drove off from the scrapyard exactly how I came in, no rush, no drama. Back in my home garage. I wrestled the heavy casting onto my stand, starting a teardown routine I've done hundreds of times. But I had never looked this closely at anything before. I took my time using basic solvent and a brush, scrubbing slowly from the valve covers right down the cylinders. Washing away 40 years of dead oil, I watched those brown rivers run off the casting and pool onto my mat. I worked in total silence, just like my old man taught me, absolutely zero distractions. Because sound tells a story in this shop. And you and I both know, noise just drowns out the real secrets hiding there. My breath hung white in the freezing drafts blowing under the roll-up door. But I honestly didn't care. I was completely locked into the process. I was letting the metal speak. 3 slow hours later, the shape under all that ugly grease absolutely blew my mind. I suspected something at the junkyard, but this bare alloy composition was completely off the charts. I decided to test it with a simple magnet and some chemical spot drops from my back cabinet, and man, this was a custom aluminum silicon mix, nothing like the mainstream engines I usually fix for a living. The base casting was absolutely flawless, and through my magnifying glass, the surface cuts were perfect, real aerospace-grade precision hiding right there. The bare combustion chamber. Shapes became clear once I finally scrubbed the cylinder head enough to see them. Totally asymmetric, it screamed pure airflow performance, ignoring any cheap mass-production shortcuts. This definitely wasn't some daily commuter. Whoever built this masterpiece was solving a very specific mechanical challenge right at the bleeding edge of engineering physics, and they actually carved this potential by hand. Then I found something strange. Day 2, right under the intake flange, buried deep beneath some crusty, hardened old engine sealant. I spotted a hidden stamp, struck with a totally different tool than the main serial. I chipped the crust away gently, using a tiny pick and my jeweler's glass. Hiding underneath was half an old code string, 8 mysterious characters just sitting there. 4 were crystal clear, matching absolutely nothing in my usual shop manuals. I jotted those numbers into the tiny notebook I keep right next to my coffee mug. I've tracked every cool, hidden car secret in those pages for 12 long years. My own bookshelves near the back of the shop hold way more technical specs and racing history than any local public library. That evening I grabbed 3 heavy books on competition engine building, covering 1955 to 1980, and cross-referenced those faded digits against every single track program I could possibly dig up. No exact match, but let me show you what made me sit straight up in my chair. Deep inside the second book was a tiny reference, completely buried, down in a footnote on page 311, detailing an American racing outfit that had run briefly in the late 1960s under a small group of manufacturers and rogue engineers crafting a wild turbocharged flat-plane crankshaft project. An endurance racing engine platform holding potential beneath the grime. The racing program died suddenly after a massive fire hit a testing facility in 1971. On paper, every single prototype piece was considered lost forever. Logan leaned back, staring at the ceiling, seeing past the surface. He looked at his notes, then at the rusted block. He showed the patience others lacked, scrubbing until 3 in the morning, uncovering a third hidden identification mark. This one was buried deep, stamped underneath the crankcase skirt, placed so awkwardly that only someone with the patience to truly look would ever spot it. He carefully wrote the entire surviving sequence down, letter by letter. Then he sat perfectly still at the bench, both hands holding on to a freezing coffee cup, while harsh overhead lights highlighted the engine's rusted potential. He pictured his dad sitting right here on a cold winter night years ago. Raymond speaking in that slow, patient tone he always used for a real lesson. Never let another man declare something's value before you take the time to see it. Most folks just walk away the moment the surface gets ugly, right? At 19 years old, Logan hadn't quite grasped the depth of that advice. It made perfect sense now. He stayed awake all night. He cracked open 3 more reference books. He fired off 4 messages to car historians he trusted over the years. And by sunrise, he'd gathered enough proof that the hidden truth he dared not imagine shifted from completely impossible to genuinely terrifying. He stood alone in the garage as the pale morning light crept in. Staring at the rusty block, he knew he had to get a second expert opinion. Not out of doubt, but because the raw potential he found was simply too massive. Logan spent 3 full days, building his case the way he always did, patiently looking past the obvious. He printed out the reference papers, marked them with red ink, building a detailed cross-reference chart, matching his old block's exact measurements against every known race prototype from that era, and captured every hidden stamp beneath 3 different lighting setups. He kept all this secret from the folks in Mill Haven. You and I know how small towns are. They love feasting on other people's quiet dreams. Not to cheer them on, but to watch them crash and burn. The first guy he called was a retired mechanical engineer down in Cincinnati who spent 20 years rebuilding classic race cars, holding a reputation as the sharpest private historian of American auto racing nationwide. Logan made the drive on a Saturday with the engine block hidden beneath a canvas tarp and spent 2 patient hours watching the expert circle the rusted metal without touching it, then methodically trace its surfaces for another hour, then sit silently at a desk covered in reference photos for 40 long minutes. Finally, the 71-year-old expert named Warren spoke up. A man who never wasted words looked right at him and said, "I cannot tell you with certainty what this is. But what I can tell you is that it doesn't match any standard piece I've personally examined in 40 years of doing this work. So what do we make of this? That's not saying it's significant, but it's certainly not worthless." The next person to look past the rust was Dr. Patricia Hole at a Nashville University Motorsport History Archive. She wrote her dissertation on those forgotten American racing programs from the 1960s and 70s. I sent her the photos, plus my notes on the hidden sequences. She saw the potential too, calling back in 18 hours. Her voice had that incredibly careful tone of someone afraid to believe in the massive value hiding right beneath the surface. "The sequence you patiently uncovered," she told me carefully, "matches the exact production notation system used by the Whitmore Group. They were the legendary engineers behind what automotive historians call the secret Apex program. I want to be clear, I am not confirming anything, but the structure absolutely aligns with the surviving documentation from that very same racing program." She paused. "If that rusty block is what it seems, the historical value is absolutely massive." I drove straight back home to Mill Haven and hit the garage. I had one last patient inspection to do. One I delayed, knowing that once I proved its true worth, everything was going to change. My life as a struggling single dad would permanently split into a before and an after. Hiding under the crankcase skirt, just below the stamp I already cleaned, patient scrubbing had revealed a tiny, faint rectangular mark buried in the rough aluminum surface, easily overlooked by anyone in a blind rush. I grabbed my jeweler's loupe, cranked the bench light all the way up, and leaned in close. The hidden impression was a casting mark, a tiny shape, a circle framing a stylized letter A crossed by a sharp line through the top. The unmistakable secret signature the Apex program stamped on every single prototype engine they built. That overlooked detail existed in only 2 surviving historical records, both of which I had pinned to my garage wall, trusting that patience would finally pay off. The mark was incredibly faint, but it was clear and real. Picture this. I set the loupe down, dropped onto my stool, and just stared at the forgotten treasure. I had returned to Mill Haven at 28 to take care of my dying dad. I sacrificed my own career and any real future. 6 days a week in a struggling repair shop for 6 long, exhausting years. While everybody around me assumed I was just a mechanic going nowhere. But here I am at 34, standing in the cold gray light of my dad's old garage on Elm and 4th. I was staring at hard proof that I had recognized one of the most significant surviving artifacts of American motorsport history, buried in a scrap pile for $400. I sat there alone, letting myself truly feel the massive weight of what this hidden potential meant. But you and I know secrets rarely stay hidden. I tried to be careful. But keeping quiet in a small town is practically a losing battle. Within 2 weeks of my first quiet calls for help, whispers about what I saw underneath the grime at the salvage yard were sweeping the automotive collector community, completely destroying the slow, careful, patient investigation I had originally set out to do. I never posted a single picture online, never told anyone in town. But Warren up in Cincinnati slipped up and told a classic car colleague. And naturally, that guy passed the rumor on to someone else. You and I know how fast rumors spread among car collectors. It's a lot messier than these experts ever want to admit. Take Ella Monroe, 29 years old, writing for one of the biggest classic auto magazines in the whole country. A quarterly book focused on the roots of mechanical history, car collector culture, and those messy, disputed barn find authentication stories. She showed up at my shop on a Tuesday afternoon. Notepad on the seat, buzzing with that hungry energy reporters always bring. Chasing down a rumor she couldn't prove but just couldn't let go of either. She knocked on my bay door, introducing herself straight and professional, asking nice and easy if I'd be willing to go on the record today. I kept it polite, firm. Told her I was still authenticating it, nothing for her magazine yet. Ella handed me her card, didn't argue, and walked out. I watched her sit in her rental car for several minutes. She wasn't defeated, she was just scheming, figuring out what I was hiding. The phone calls started next week. First was a Charlotte collector, calling himself a serious buyer, offered 50 grand sight unseen. Just going off the blind rumors he heard through the grapevine. I thanked the guy, passed. 2 days pass, some Northeast syndicate calls floating an offer of $100,000, 24-hour inspection window. I said no again. Then a fancy broker specializing in motorsport heritage called, representing some European ghost, tossing out $250,000. No inspection needed, instant wire transfer. Total secrecy promised. I ended the call in under 2 minutes. You see, the money wasn't the point. I knew that the second I cleaned the grime and saw that casting mark. That block sitting on my workbench wasn't just some quick flip for cash. It was a question asked 60 years ago by brilliant engineers who pushed past the edge of what was possible. It sat hidden in a barn for decades while everyone forgot how to look deeper. I sure wasn't answering a 60-year-old mystery with a cheap phone call to some broker. Folks here in Mill Haven noticed those big offers, though. And by week number 2, the whole town decided, with that loud certainty small towns always get, that I was sitting on top of some serious life-changing money. Amelia caught wind of the rumors from 2 different people that same afternoon, both of them spilling the news with that tone folks get when something's more entertaining than actually true. She didn't call me. She probably convinced herself my luck was just a fluke, couldn't see past the rust to believe it was really as special as claimed. Still, I know she kept chewing on the idea over the coming days, turning it over the exact way you and I turn. Over an idea we want to toss out but just can't manage to let go. Then, Thursday evening, my phone lights up with a brand new unknown number. The voice on the other end was slow, calm, and perfectly measured. It carried that heavy, patient kind of quiet that only belongs to people who spent decades seeing the real picture while everyone else panicked blind. "My name is Sebastian Hayes," the deep voice had said. "I've been told you have a rusty piece I've spent years patiently hunting for. If you don't mind, I want to come down and see it for myself." I sank onto my workbench stool. When Sebastian actually arrived, he drove himself, which honestly shocked me. I figured he'd bring a handler or assistant. You know the entourage that huge wealth and reputation naturally drag along. Instead, just a single dark blue pickup truck rolled onto my lot that Saturday morning. The guy who stepped out of the cab was 62 years old, lean and tough, the kind of quiet physical discipline you don't need to show off. He wore standard canvas work pants and a totally plain charcoal jacket, pure function, not meant for a showroom. His face looked incredibly weathered but precise. A guy who survived decades in high-stakes shops. His eyes were light gray, steady, and completely unhurried. He scanned the outside of my garage like a man who calculates the true worth of a space before stepping inside. I met him right at the doorway. We shook hands without any fake politeness. Anyone who turns a wrench in motorsport knows the name Sebastian Hayes. He secured 3 massive endurance racing championships. Back in his prime, and later built a totally new reputation as one of the world's most serious private engine collectors, and a legendary preserver of North American racing heritage machinery. This guy definitely did not take road trips on a whim. Him driving 4 hours to my tiny shop in Millhaven, Kentucky, told me everything. You and I know he saw the hidden potential everyone else missed. Sebastian stepped into my shop and stopped right at the threshold. He quietly studied the space, my hydraulic lifts, the tool wall, the rows of technical manuals, and my strictly organized main workbench. He said absolutely nothing about the garage itself. He just glanced at the greasy block on the workstand, then looked away. To me, that quick dismissal meant way more than him staring. He finally turned to me and asked, "Tell me where you found it." I laid it all out. Ryan Foster's junkyard, that estate delivery from Harlan County. How awful it looked, the strange casting geometry that caught my eye, the $400 I paid. I explained my careful cleaning process, the tedious alloy composition testing, uncovering that hidden secondary stamp, driving up to see Warren in Cincinnati, calling Doc Holt down in Nashville, and spotting that casting mark beneath the crankcase skirt. I spoke without any embellishment. Exactly how my dad taught me, precision diagnostics, no hype, just the raw, overlooked truth. Sebastian listened without interrupting once. When I finally finished, Sebastian walked over and stood right before the battered block. He pulled a small folding loop from his pocket, extending it up to his eye. He hovered over that greasy metal like a jeweler inspecting a rough stone. He worked in dead silence for maybe 35 minutes, moving around the block in a slow, patient circuit, studying the exact same ugly surfaces I had spent weeks patiently decoding. The shop was so quiet, the distant Elm Street traffic just faded into a low background hum. When Sebastian finally stood up straight and tucked the little loop away, he stayed completely quiet for another long moment. Then he turned back and just looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years, recognition of hidden value. A kind of calm, unhurried respect. "I scoured the Southeast for almost 3 decades looking for this," Sebastian said. "Estate sales, barn finds, private collections, and demolition auctions. Back in the 90s, I even had field researchers across 8 different states. Came close twice, in Tennessee and Virginia, but they turned out to be dead ends." He turned his eyes back to my rusted engine block. I figured it was gone forever, that the '71 fire had destroyed every last piece. He paused, clearly it survived. I kept my voice steady. "So it is what I think it is." Sebastian stared right at me. "Do you realize what you actually have here?" he asked. It wasn't rhetorical. He wanted facts. I took my time weighing my words before answering. "I know it's a surviving prototype block from the original Apex racing program. I know they built fewer than 6 functional test motors before the project was killed, and that everyone assumed all of them were completely destroyed. I know no confirmed surviving engine has ever been publicly documented anywhere." I paused. "Beyond that, I'd really rather hear what you know." Sebastian studied the greasy iron for a long, quiet moment. When he finally spoke, his tone held deep, genuine emotion, carefully masked by a man who had spent years learning to hide his feelings. The Apex program. It was the closest anyone got before modern computers to actually solving that nightmare flat plane crankshaft balance issue in a massive displacement build. He explained those engineers were some of the 20th century's sharpest mechanical minds, and most of those brilliant guys never got a dime of credit. The program died before the public ever saw their genius. This motor was their life's work, built by folks who fully understood that the most valuable things are what everyone else forgets to look for. He stopped. "You and I both know finding this in a junkyard says a lot about the world." I sank down onto the wooden stool by my workbench. "And the fact that you saw its potential," he added quietly, "says everything about you." The talk we had after that was deep, technical, and flowed exactly how the best late-night garage conversations always seem to. We took our time. Like any good mechanic knows, real precision matters way more than speed. Sebastian asked detailed questions about my exact cleaning methods, the shape of the crankshaft journals, the strength of those cylinder bore surfaces. And I answered every single one with the respect they deserved. By noon, we had burned through 2 pots of cheap coffee from the machine at the back of my shop. The cold winter light creeping through the high windows faded from dull gray to pale white. Then Sebastian put down his coffee cup, locking eyes with me with that same intense, unblinking focus. "I want to make an offer," he said. "But before we talk numbers, you and I need to clear something up. I never throw out offers just to start a negotiation. When I give a price, it is because I believe that price is completely honest. And I'll gladly explain exactly why." He broke down the engine's real worth in American racing history, entirely ignoring its cash value. We'd get to the money soon, but we both knew true innovation is what really matters. Sebastian spoke of the engineers whose entire careers were defined by this exact build passing away before anyone saw their true genius, about how saving its forgotten history would change the automotive record forever. Then he offered $1 million. I did not even flinch. Straight cash. My team handles all the historical provenance paperwork. The motor stays in the U.S. preserved and displayed exactly how a piece of this magnitude truly deserves, Sebastian went on. That is my starting offer. I told him I needed time. Sebastian just nodded. I expected that. News of his visit ripped through the classic car market. You know how fast people move when they finally see the potential they missed. By the very next morning, 2 more heavy-hitting collectors reached out. One buyer came through Ella Monroe, who somehow kept herself hovering right around the action. Another offer came from a direct call to Ryan Foster. Ryan had no clue he tossed away pure gold for $400. He spent 15 minutes on the phone with me, completely stunned. That second offer passed through a middleman, hit $1.5 million. The third bid from a European racing museum hit $2 million. I kept every single one of them waiting. I called Sebastian back. We met up for dinner at the only decent spot in Mill Haven that kept its doors open past 9. An old joint with cracked vinyl seats, but the coffee was seriously good. We sat there for 3 solid hours, talking vintage motors and history. We discussed why things hold secret value long past their supposed expiration dates. Amelia Brooks strolled past the window at 9:45 that night. She spotted me sitting right across from Sebastian Hayes in our booth, both of us leaning in, deep into a conversation that actually meant something. She froze right there. She just stood out there in the freezing cold, staring through the diner glass. Then she walked to her car. She sat in the lot for a while with her motor running, holding on to that heavy realization of someone who finally sees exactly what they threw away. She walked away from a brilliant future just because it looked broken. Back inside the diner, Sebastian said, "I am prepared to go to $2 million. I want you to hear that before other collectors muddy the waters." I just looked at him across the table. "You have more room than that," I told him. Not an accusation, just a simple fact from someone who knows. Sebastian stayed quiet for a long second, then he almost smiled. "I do." "All right." He glanced out the dark window, then looked right back. $4 million, final offer. Because I believe this machine belongs with someone who actually cares about what happens to its legacy next. And I have been around long enough to know the price must honor its true hidden greatness, not just its rarity. He paused. $4 million. And I want your name permanently etched on the historical documents. Not just some hired consultant, but an equal partner. The restaurant fell completely silent around us. 2 booths over, an older couple quietly ate their pie. Sharing that comfortable quiet you only earn when you know true value takes absolute patience, not constant noise or flashy words. I stared at that worn table for a long time. Then I finally spoke. "I have one condition." 3 days later, Amelia called me. Her tone was completely different from that day she mocked me at the scrapyard. That fake confidence was still there, but now masking the bitter regret of someone who finally saw the worth she tossed away. She asked if they could meet. Just to talk, totally off the clock. Logan agreed, knowing true motives take time to surface. You and I both know what this was. Why make her struggle to see the worth she'd missed before? They met at 2nd Street Park, a freezing, empty afternoon on a regular weekday. Bare branches cast long, thin shadows over the icy grass. Amelia wore an expensive coat, careful makeup, and the face of someone rehearsing lines, unsure if her audience would even stick around to hear them. She brought up the scrapyard first, admitted her cruel words about that old engine were a terrible mistake. How she should have stopped the mocking laughter instead of joining in so easily. Her apology felt real. She meant every word. This wasn't just a calculated performance. Yet beneath the surface, a deeper truth kept bleeding through. She knew she wasn't just saying sorry for mocking a rusty piece of scrap. That junked engine just exposed her lifelong habit of impatience. Logan listened quietly, staying still. He had spent enough time alone over the years to know the exact difference between the kind of silence that chokes out someone's hidden potential and the patient silence that gives it room. He offered her that patient space. When she finished, he just stared quietly at the icy ground. "You never had to apologize for the engine," he said. "I knew its worth even when you lacked the patience." Amelia stared at him. "I'm not just apologizing for the scrap." "I know," he replied. She fell silent. "I thought value meant looking shiny on the outside right away," she quietly confessed. "I judged your worth on a superficial standard that completely missed your hidden potential." She gripped her coat tighter. "I was wrong, not just about the metal." Logan looked back without anger. That lack of spite hurt her most, not because she wanted a bitter fight, but because his calm reaction proved he possessed a deep worth she'd never had the patience to uncover. He wasn't giving up or acting weak when she left. He simply didn't need the shallow surface-level approval she had been handing out. "You didn't pick the wrong guy," he said. "You just couldn't see my actual potential." He said it calmly, without blame. Just stating a mechanical truth, like pointing out rust not to hurt, just being exact. "I was always meant to be a man spending mornings covered in grease and evenings studying old motor parts. That isn't a slump. That's not a failure to tap into true worth." He paused. "You wanted instant shine, that's not wrong." Amelia watched him for a long second, and her tense expression finally shifted. Not shattering apart, but finally settling. Like an old chassis settling once the heavy, misplaced weight is finally lifted off. "I'm glad things worked out for you," she said. She really meant it. "Me too," Logan said. He meant it as well. They stood silently in the freezing park. "Stick with me." That quiet wasn't awkward. It was just the honest piece of two people dropping the act, accepting that forced polish never lasts as long as patient, genuine metal. Amelia finally whispered goodbye and headed back to her car. I stood under those bare branches a little while longer, hands shoved deep in my pockets, just watching that pale winter sky over Mill Haven. I didn't feel any huge triumph. You know that rush when a threat passes? Not that. I felt something much quieter, built to last. The solid clarity of a guy who finally trusts the potential he's seen all along. Like standing in an old room that finally caught some light. You and I both know the choice wasn't as simple as the cash. I sat with that decision for days after my dinner with Sebastian. Every morning I'd stare at that old engine block in the shop, asking myself a question with no easy, logical answer. What do you actually do with something like this? After the patience it took to dig it out, keeping the motor was never about money. I could have hoarded the engine for years, watching its cash value and historical importance steadily climb. I could be the guy who saved it, earning my own little slice of glory. The reason to let it go was harder. This motor was built to be opened up and understood. It belonged where real historians and sharp engineers could look past the grime and learn. Not hiding under a tarp in my small garage just so I could feel important. I know the difference between guarding a treasure and just selfishly hoarding it. I drove out to the cemetery one evening after I locked up the shop, sitting quiet by my dad's grave. Just a simple gray stone that stated the bare facts without any extra noise. Raymond Carter, the years he lived, and right below that, the single line I picked. He taught his hands to listen. Sitting in the chill, I explained the whole situation, exactly how we used to talk through tough repair jobs. Just laying the facts out bare, not demanding an easy fix. I just needed to think it out near the only man who got how my mind worked. Dad never judged a man's success by the flashy things he owned. He measured it by whether a guy could look closely at his own. work at sunset, and honestly know he saw the job through with real patience. Next morning I called Sebastian up. "I will accept," I said. $4 million, but I have one rule and I won't budge. Sebastian just replied, "Go ahead." In all the official history paperwork, the archives, the press files, everything you print, I want my dad's name on it. Raymond Carter. He taught me the patience to find this motor, to see the potential others threw away. If this machine gets a spot in history, his name rides right next to it. The phone went dead quiet for a second. Then Sebastian said, "That is not a condition. That's a strict requirement. I should have suggested it myself. I'll make it permanent." I took a breath. "Then we have a deal." I hung up, walked straight out to the shop, and stared at that block on the stand for a good while. It was the exact same piece of metal I dragged out of Ryan Foster's junk pile. The same rusty block Amelia had glanced at, absolutely certain it was just another worthless lost cause. The metal itself hadn't changed. What changed was how people saw it. You and I know the grime just hid its history. The raw potential beneath the rust finally made clear. You and I know the truth. With enough patience and the right knowledge, what the impatient call worthless reveals its genuine, priceless core. Logan brushed his hand across that rough, forgotten cylinder head. A vintage metal casting, flawed on the surface but perfect underneath. Forged by careful craftsmen who valued invisible precision over cheap recognition. This historic engine block sat silently in the dark for 60 years, waiting for someone patient enough to see its true, hidden potential. He reflected on those quiet engineers. He remembered his hard-working father. He unapologetically felt he had finally honored both of their careful, enduring legacies. The legal paperwork took 6 weeks, much quicker than Logan anticipated. A reflection of Sebastian Hayes's highly meticulous organization. And proof that massive vintage car transactions require patient teams who look deeply and know exactly what they are handling. The massive wire transfer cleared on a Tuesday morning. Logan simply sat in his auto shop, staring at the screen, letting the reality of that recognized potential soak in before starting his workday. He didn't buy a flashy brand new house. He ignored the urge to buy luxury cars, take expensive vacations, or drastically change the humble way he dressed. He still ate breakfast at the same quiet diner every weekday. Instead, he poured value into his shop, carefully rebuilding and calibrating the hydraulic lifts. He installed a powerful compressed air system. And he added a third service bay, expanding outward into an adjacent, completely overlooked storage space he had owned for years, finally unlocking its long-hidden practical purpose. He patiently invested in the complete machine shop setup he had quietly desired for over 10 years. A heavy-duty lathe, a precision milling table, and top-tier measuring gear. The exact kind of serious equipment that turns a basic garage into a haven for true classic car restoration. He hired 2 eager mechanics. Both were fresh, unpolished graduates from the technical college just 1 county over. Young guys with raw talent who just needed a mentor to show them that patient, quiet competence is true ambition. Ella Monroe finally published his incredible story in the spring issue of her journal. It quickly became the single most read article the publication had produced in 22 long years. Her detailed article deeply explored the forgotten Apex racing program. The shady circumstances surrounding the engine's disappearance. Stick with me, this improbable chain of events ultimately ended right with Logan. Scrubbing a $400 salvage yard find, uncovering the treasure beneath 40 years of grime. One of the most historically valuable surviving artifacts in all of American motorsport. The story respectfully mentioned Raymond Carter by name and featured a photograph of the small, dignified plaque that Sebastian Hayes had, commissioned to sit proudly beside the engine at its permanent, highly respected preservation facility. A dignified plaque that read in part, "Engine identified and completely authenticated by Logan Carter of Mill Haven, Kentucky," following the exact principles of patient mechanical attention taught by his wise father. Raymond Carter. Amelia Brooks eventually saw the article. She looked at the photos of his thoughtfully restored garage, the proud new sign, and the massive line of cars waiting patiently that busy Saturday morning. She had hastily relocated to a city 3 hours away last year, chasing the shallow, immediate metrics she always used to measure her own restless life. We've all known someone like her. She sat staring at the page all morning, finally reading Logan's quiet quote at the very end. A response characteristically brief, humble, and precise. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just trusted the hidden potential and patiently stuck around. She closed her journal, setting it on the cold kitchen counter. She wasn't just jealous or dealing with basic regret over walking away from something that only looked like a dead end back then. It was a deeper realization. Knowing she once had the chance to see the incredible worth hidden inside Logan Carter. She mistook his quiet patience for laziness, totally blind to his potential, and abandoned a man whose quiet brilliance made him one of the most truly valuable people she would ever know. The payout just forced the world to finally see the worth that was always there. Take a quiet morning in April. Logan unlocked the shop at 7, brewing his morning coffee. He stood in the third bay, studying a rusted 1968 competition coupe brought in for a complete mechanical restoration. This was his calling, stripping away the rust to find the heartbeat, a puzzle demanding all his patient skill. And it rewarded him with the beauty of hidden potential. His dad's faded photo hung right above the workbench, sitting patiently in the exact same little frame for years. His phone rang, he checked the screen. Ryan Foster, Logan answered. Ryan was already laughing hard before he even finished speaking. You won't believe the buried treasure I just found. Logan simply looked up at his father's photo. He felt the quiet warmth of a life built right. A life whose immense inner value had finally become visible. He put his mug down. I'll be right there, he said. You and I could easily write off Logan's success as pure luck, just some guy standing in the right spot. A random fortune yanked out of a worthless scrap pile. That lie is easy to swallow because it completely ignores the power of genuine patience. It treats true value like a lottery ticket, pretending deep potential isn't something you actually have to work for. But we know the real truth. The truth is Logan spent 20 years patiently finding the worth hidden inside old metal. He gave up shiny promotions to protect a bond with far more underlying value. He quietly did the dirtiest work without demanding any applause. He grew his rare expertise slowly, completely out of sight. And when the rusted exterior finally cracked open for him, he was prepared not by sheer luck but by extreme patience. By always choosing to see massive potential in scrap that everyone else threw straight into the trash. Our world is packed with hidden gems left rusting away, begging for someone with the vision to restore them. Most people just walk past. But sometimes a rare person actually stops, kneels, and looks deeper, and realizes the ugly block everyone ignored actually holds the greatest, most unstoppable horsepower imaginable. We know this story isn't just about money. This is about a man who knew that being overlooked doesn't mean you're worthless, possessing the iron patience to let the hidden greatness speak for itself.